One afternoon, during a particularly intense training session, Stanley's hand lingered on my waist a moment too long. As he adjusted my form, I felt his stick on my backside. It wasn't hard, but felt bigger than what I'm used to. My breath hitched, and our eyes met. There was a tension between us, unspoken but undeniable. I can't pretend I was dripping wet. I really wanted that big stick in me. I almost said, "Come inside me." Let me pause for a second. If you've made it this far, you are clearly intrigued. This is just the beginning of this explosive tale. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Trust me, it gets more interesting. Let's go back to how it all began. "You've gained a little weight," my husband Tom said one evening, his voice casual but the words slicing through me like cold steel. He didn't mean to hurt me, but he did. That's the irony of marriage, isn't it? The people closest to you can wound you the most with the gentlest of words. I'd always been confident, or at least I thought I had been. But after 2 kids and 12 years of marriage, my body wasn't what it used to be. The woman Tom had married was toned, energetic, and full of life. Now I was tired, sagging in places I didn't know could sag, and suffocating under the weight of my insecurities. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I would do whatever it took to get myself back, to feel sexy again, to remind Tom of the woman he fell in love with. The next morning, I signed up for a gym membership. Walking into the gym for the first time was like stepping into another world. The smell of sweat and rubber filled the air, machines whirred, and music thumped in the background. It was intimidating. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing, their bodies gleaming and perfect. I felt like an intruder, out of place and foolish. That was until I met Stanley. Stanley was the gym's head trainer. Tall, broad-shouldered, and strikingly handsome, his presence was impossible to ignore. His skin glowed with a deep, rich warmth, and his smile could light up the darkest room. When he approached me, clipboard in hand, I felt my pulse quicken. "First time here?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. I nodded, suddenly aware of how nervous I was. "Don't worry, we'll take it slow. I'm Stanley, by the way." He took me through a basic orientation, showing me how the machines worked and designing a workout plan tailored to my goals. His professionalism was impeccable, yet there was an undeniable energy about him, something magnetic that made it hard to look away. When our eyes met, it felt as though he could see right through me, past the facade I wore and into the depths of my insecurities. Over the next few weeks, my sessions with Stanley became the highlight of my days. He was encouraging, pushing me just enough to challenge myself without overwhelming me. "You're stronger than you think," he'd say, his deep voice resonating with sincerity. And for the first time in years, I started to believe it. I'd catch myself looking forward to his compliments, the way he'd smile when I completed a tough set, or how he'd place a steadying hand on my back to correct my form. Those small, fleeting moments made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just about the physical. Stanley had a way of making me feel seen. We'd talk during our sessions, and he'd ask about my life, my dreams, my struggles. He listened in a way that felt rare and precious. "You're doing this for yourself, right?" he'd ask, and I'd nod, though deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely true. One evening, after an especially grueling session, I found myself lingering in the gym's parking lot, too spent to drive home. Stanley came out, a towel slung over his shoulder. "Tough day?" he asked, leaning against the car next to mine. I nodded, laughing weakly. "You could say that." "You're doing great, you know," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." For a moment, I felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth that spread through my chest. "Thank you," I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His smile, his words, the way he made me feel alive again. It was innocent, or at least that's what I told myself. After all, I was doing this for Tom, wasn't I? To make him see me again? But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. This was just the beginning. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. The weeks passed, and my body began to change. My muscles grew stronger, and the mirror started to reflect a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. The confidence I had lost began to trickle back, slow but steady. And with every passing day, I felt more drawn to Stanley. Our sessions became more personal. He'd ask about my childhood, my dreams, even my fears. It was easy to open up to him, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't even told Tom. Stanley listened intently, his dark eyes holding mine as though nothing else in the world mattered. "You're really inspiring," he said one day, handing me a bottle of water after an especially tough workout. "Most people give up when things get hard, but not you. You're different." The way he said it made my heart skip a beat. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Thank you. That means a lot." It was during one of our sessions that Stanley suggested we meet outside the gym. "You've been working so hard," he said. "You deserve a break. How about grabbing a coffee sometime?" The offer took me by surprise. My first instinct was to decline. After all, wasn't this crossing a line? But then I thought about it. It was just coffee, wasn't it? Innocent, harmless, and so I found myself saying yes. We met at a cozy cafe on the edge of town. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the air filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Stanley greeted me with a smile that made my stomach flutter. "You look amazing," he said, pulling out a chair for me. I blushed, feeling like a schoolgirl on her first date. "Thank you," I murmured, sitting down. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything and nothing, laughter punctuating our words. It felt good to be seen, to be heard. For the first time in years, I felt like more than just a wife, a mother. I felt like a woman. As we sipped our coffee, Stanley leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You deserve to be happy," he said softly. "Don't ever forget that." His words lingered long after we said our goodbyes. Driving home, I couldn't help but replay the evening in my mind. The way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. It was intoxicating, like a drug I couldn't get enough of. That night, as I lay in bed next to Tom, I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at the edges of my mind. I told myself it was nothing, that it didn't mean anything, but deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted, and there was no turning back. The days following my coffee with Stanley were a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to convince myself that it was just a friendly meeting, that I hadn't done anything wrong. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His laugh, his smile, the way he made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. At home, things with Tom remained unchanged. He was kind, attentive in his own way, but his compliments felt perfunctory, as if they were part of a routine. "You look nice," he'd say, before burying his head in his phone or the evening news. The spark we once shared had dimmed, replaced by the comfortable monotony of married life. But with Stanley, there was fire. One afternoon, during a particularly intense training session, Stanley's hand lingered on my waist a moment too long as he adjusted my form. My breath hitched, and our eyes met. There was a tension between us, unspoken but undeniable. "You're doing great," he said, his voice lower than usual. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. The air between us was charged, electric. Later that day, as I was leaving the gym, Stanley caught up with me in the parking lot. "Hey," he called, jogging to my car. "I was thinking we should do a one-on-one session outside the gym. Maybe a run or some outdoor training?" I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to set a boundary. But then I thought about how alive I felt around him, how he made me feel like the woman I used to be. "Okay," I heard myself say. "That sounds nice." We met at a park the following weekend. The morning air was crisp, the sun casting golden rays through the trees. Stanley greeted me with his usual warm smile, but there was something different in his eyes, a heat that made my pulse race. We started with a light jog, transitioning into strength exercises on the grass. He was as professional as always, guiding me through the movements, but there was an intimacy to the setting that made it hard to ignore the growing tension between us. As we finished the session, sitting on a bench to catch our breath, Stanley turned to me. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said, his voice soft but intense. "I don't think you realize how amazing you are." I looked away, my cheeks burning. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his hand brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the moment linger, the world around us fading until it was just the two of us. When he leaned in, I didn't stop him. His lips were warm, his kiss tender, but filled with a passion that took my breath away. For a moment, I forgot about everything. Tom, my kids, the life I had built. All that mattered was the way Stanley made me feel. As we pulled apart, reality came crashing down. I have to go," I stammered, grabbing my bag and rushing to my car. My heart pounded as I drove away, tears blurring my vision. What had I done? That night, as I lay in bed, guilt and exhilaration warred within me. I knew I had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. But even as shame consumed me, a part of me longed for more. It started as a whisper in my mind, a voice that refused to be silenced. Each time I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I could bury it, the memory of Stanley's touch, his kiss, pushed its way to the surface. The guilt was unbearable, but so was the thrill. I knew I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, but part of me didn't care. Tom noticed the shift in me. "You seem distracted lately," he said one evening, his eyes searching mine. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, brushing his concern aside. "Just tired from the gym. You know how hard I've been working." He nodded, accepting my excuse, but I could feel his lingering doubt. Tom wasn't a fool, and neither was I. Secrets have a way of festering, growing until they can no longer be contained. It was during a particularly quiet Sunday afternoon that I broke. Tom and the kids were watching a movie, laughter filling the house, but all I could feel was the weight of my lies. I slipped outside, sitting on the porch steps with my head in my hands. The tears came without warning, hot and relentless. Stanley's texts had been coming more frequently, each one a mix of encouragement and desire. "You're incredible," he wrote one morning. "I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't reply, but I didn't block him either. Part of me wanted to hold on to that connection, that escape. A week later, Stanley texted me again, asking if I wanted to meet at the park. My resolve was crumbling, and I found myself typing a hesitant reply. "I can't. This has to stop." His response came quickly. "I understand, but just know you deserve to be happy." Those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I tried to navigate the chasm between who I was and who I wanted to be. I loved Tom, at least I thought I did, but the woman I had become with Stanley was someone I didn't want to let go of. That evening, I made the hardest decision of my life. Sitting across from Tom at the dinner table, I watched him laugh with the kids, his face glowing with the warmth of a man who believed his life was whole. My chest tightened. He deserved the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. "Tom," I said softly, my voice trembling. He looked up, his smile fading when he saw the tears in my eyes. "We need to talk." The kids, sensing the tension, fell silent. Tom glanced at them, then back at me, concern etched across his face. "Go play upstairs for a bit," he said gently. They hesitated, but obeyed, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. I haven't been honest with you." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I couldn't meet his eyes. "I've been seeing someone. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did." The air seemed to leave the room. Tom's face went pale, his jaw tightening as he processed my words. "Who?" he asked, his voice low and strained. "It's not important," I replied quickly, tears streaming down my cheeks. "What matters is that I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake." He stood abruptly, pacing the room as anger and hurt radiated from him. How long has this been going on? Not long, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I swear it wasn't physical until recently, but emotionally, I crossed a line. The silence that followed was unbearable. Tom finally stopped, turning to face me. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why would you do this? I wiped my tears, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in his eyes. I don't know, I admitted. I wanted to feel something again. I wanted to feel like I mattered. You matter to me, he said, his voice rising. You've always mattered. How could you not see that? I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling hollow. I never wanted to hurt you. For a long time, Tom didn't say anything. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. We need time, he said. I need time to think. That night, I slept on the couch, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The house felt colder, emptier, as though my confession had sucked all the warmth from it. The kids asked questions the next morning, their innocent curiosity cutting deeper than any words Tom could have said. Weeks turned into months as Tom and I worked to rebuild what had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with arguments, others with painful silences. But slowly, we began to find our way back to each other. Counseling helped, giving us the tools to communicate in ways we hadn't before. I cut all ties with Stanley, deleting his number and blocking him on every platform. It was painful, like severing a part of myself, but it was necessary. I knew I couldn't heal if I held on to the pieces of my betrayal. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about losing weight or feeling attractive again. It was about rediscovering who I was, understanding the parts of myself I had neglected for so long. And while the road was rough, it ultimately led me back to the person I had always wanted to be. Tom and I aren't perfect, but we're trying, and sometimes that's enough.